You're going to pay Faithis, you racist!
911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was small, trembling, but absolutely determined. My name is Zara Mitchell. I'm 11 years old and I'm on Flight 772 to Chicago. A flight attendant has been hurting passengers. She grabbed my arm and left a bruise. She won't let an elderly man use the bathroom because of his medical condition. She said a bathroom wasn't for people like me. I have everything written down. I have witnesses. We land in 25 minutes, and I need police to meet us at the gate. The 911 operator, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez who'd been doing this job for 18 years and thought she'd heard everything, felt her hand freeze over her keyboard. In nearly 2 decades of dispatch, she'd received calls from homes, from streets, from cars on highways. But never, not once, had she received a call from someone at 35,000 feet. Zara, sweetie, you're calling from an airplane? Yes, ma'am. Flight 772. We're about to land in Chicago. Please, you have to send someone. What she's doing isn't just mean. It's illegal. And my mother taught me that when something is wrong, you don't stay quiet. You speak up. Lisa felt tears prick her eyes at the calm courage in this child's voice. She immediately began typing, flagging the call as priority, dispatching to Chicago PD and airport security. You did exactly the right thing by calling, Zara. Officers are being dispatched right now. Are you safe at this moment? Yes, ma'am. She's staying away from us now. But I needed someone to know what happened. I needed it on record. It's on record now, sweetheart. Everything you've told me is documented. And Zara? You're incredibly brave. When Zara hung up the phone, her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The elderly man sitting beside her, Professor Leonard Washington, placed his trembling hand over hers, steadying them both. You just changed everything, he whispered. You know that, right? Zara nodded, clutching her journal to her chest like a shield, and for the first time in 2 hours she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone was going to listen. But to understand how an 11-year-old girl ended up calling 911 from 35,000 feet, how a routine flight became a federal case, and how one flight attendant's hatred ignited a movement, we need to go back. Back to that morning. Back to the airport. Back to the moment when everything started to unravel. Her name was Zara Mitchell, and she was traveling alone for the very first time in her life. Zara wasn't like most 11-year-olds. While other kids spent their time on TikTok and video games, Zara lived in the pages of mystery novels and detective stories. She had this uncanny ability to read people, to notice the small details that everyone else missed. The way someone's smile didn't quite reach their eyes. The nervous tapping of fingers on an armrest. The subtle shift in tone that meant someone was lying. Her mother used to joke that Zara should become a detective, but Zara had other plans. She wanted to be a lawyer, someone who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Someone who turned observations into justice. She was small for her age, barely 4'8", with rich brown skin and thick natural hair pulled into 2 puffs secured with bright yellow beads that clicked softly whenever she moved her head. She wore an oversized purple backpack covered in pins she'd collected over the years. A first-place medal from the regional spelling bee. A small enamel pin that said, Future President. Another shaped like a scales of justice with the words, Speak Truth, across it. In her hands, she clutched a worn leather journal, its corners bent from constant use, pages filled with her careful, precise handwriting. And on her wrist, catching the fluorescent airport lights, was a simple silver bracelet, nothing fancy or expensive, but it meant everything to her. It had belonged to her mother. Dr. Simone Mitchell had worked double shifts at Chicago Memorial Hospital for nearly 2 years to make this trip possible. Simone was an emergency room physician, which meant she witnessed humanity at its absolute worst and occasionally at its absolute best. She'd delivered babies in hospital hallways when there wasn't time to reach labor and delivery. She'd held the hands of dying patients who had no family, staying past the end of her shift because no one should die alone. She'd worked 72-hour shifts during the pandemic, sleeping on cots in break rooms, going days without seeing her daughter. The exhaustion lived in her bones now, a permanent companion, but she never let Zara see how much it cost her. All Zara knew was that her mother was the strongest person in the world, and if her mom could save lives on 2 hours of sleep, then Zara could be brave enough to fly alone. The opportunity had arrived in a cream-colored envelope with an embossed seal. Zara had applied to the Midwest Youth Orchestra Summer Intensive, a prestigious 5-week program that only accepted 30 students from across the country. She played violin and she was exceptional. The kind of exceptional that made her music teacher Mrs. Chen submit the application without even telling Zara because she knew Zara would talk herself out of it, would say she wasn't good enough, would find a dozen reasons why she shouldn't even try. When the acceptance letter arrived with a full scholarship, every penny covered, tuition and room and board, Simone had collapsed onto the kitchen floor and sobbed. Not delicate tears, but the kind of deep, shoulder-shaking crying that comes from years of sacrifice finally meaning something. From wondering if working those extra shifts, missing Zara's school plays and parent-teacher conferences, if any of it would ever lead somewhere. And here was the answer, printed on expensive paper with an official signature at the bottom. But there was a problem that neither of them had anticipated. The program started in exactly 3 days and Simone couldn't get the time off work. The hospital was chronically understaffed, running on skeleton crews, and she'd already burned through most of her vacation days the previous winter when Zara had pneumonia and spent 4 days in the pediatric ward. Simone had slept in a chair beside her daughter's hospital bed, refusing to leave even when the nurses insisted she needed rest. They'd sat at their small kitchen table that night, that acceptance letter between them like a bridge to a future neither of them had dared to imagine, trying to solve an impossible equation. "I could drive you," Simone had said, already calculating in her head, running through scenarios. "If I leave right after my shift on Saturday, drive straight through the night." "Mom, that's 18 hours. You'd be coming off a 12-hour shift. You'd fall asleep at the wheel. Then we'll find a bus route. Or maybe Amtrak, there has to be a train that—" "Mom?" Zara had reached across the table and taken her mother's hands, those strong surgeon's hands that had saved countless lives, and held them gently. "I can fly alone. I'm 11. Airlines have programs specifically for unaccompanied minors. It's safe. It's normal. Kids do it all the time." Simone had stared at her daughter, this brilliant, mature, impossibly brave little girl who somehow knew exactly what to say to make impossible things seem possible, and felt her heart break and swell simultaneously. When had Zara grown up? When had she stopped being the toddler who needed her mother to check under the bed for monsters and became this person who could navigate the world alone? "Are you sure?" Simone had whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sure, Mom. I promise." But now, standing in the airport departure terminal at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, with travelers rushing past them in every direction, Simone was absolutely certain they'd made a terrible mistake. "You have your phone?" Simone asked for the 4th time, her hands adjusting and readjusting Zara's backpack straps even though they were already perfectly positioned. "Yes, Mom. Fully charged. And you remember it's only for emergencies, right? You keep it in airplane mode the entire flight unless there's an emergency." "Mom, we've been through this checklist 17 times. I know, I just—" Simone's voice broke slightly. She knelt down so she was eye level with her daughter, not caring that her scrubs were getting dirty on the airport floor, not caring that people were walking around them. "Baby, listen to me very carefully. If anything, and I mean anything, feels wrong, even a little bit wrong, you speak up. Do you hear me? I don't care if it's a flight attendant, the pilot, another passenger, anyone. If your gut tells you something isn't right, you make noise. You call me. You call the airline. You call 911 if you have to. Promise me." Zara had seen her mother serious before, seen her in doctor mode, giving instructions that could mean the difference between life and death. But this was different. There was something in her mother's eyes that Zara couldn't quite name, something that went deeper than worry. Years later, Zara would understand what she saw that morning. It was the look of a black mother sending her child out into a world that might not be kind to her. It was generations of fear and protection and hard-won wisdom compressed into a single moment. It was Simone remembering every time she'd been followed in a store, every time a patient had asked for a real doctor, every time she'd had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. And now she was sending her baby into that world alone. "I promise, Mom," Zara said solemnly, understanding without fully understanding. Simone pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, breathing in the smell of her hair, the coconut oil and shea butter, trying to memorize everything about this moment. "I love you so much, sweetheart. You're going to do incredible things at this program. You're going to make music that changes people. I'm so proud of you. I love you too, Mom." They held each other for a long moment, neither wanting to let go, both knowing they had to. Finally, Simone stood, wiping her eyes quickly, trying to pull herself together. "Okay. The airline representative is meeting you at the gate. Her name is Patricia Dominguez. She'll make sure you board safely and she'll stay with you until takeoff. When you land in Chicago, another representative will escort you to baggage claim where Mrs. Chen will be waiting. You have her number saved, right?" "Mom, I have everyone's number." "Your number, Aunt Tracy's number, Mrs. Chen's number, the airline's customer service line, and I memorized the program's address just in case my phone dies and I need to tell a cab driver where to go. Simone laughed through her tears. When did you become more responsible than me? I learned from the best. One final hug, one final kiss pressed to Zara's forehead, one final moment of being able to protect her daughter from everything the world might throw at her. And then Zara was walking toward the security checkpoint, her purple backpack bouncing with each step, yellow beads clicking softly, getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the crowd of travelers. Simone stood there long after Zara vanished from view, rooted to the spot, one hand pressed against her chest where her heart felt like it might crack open. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and texted her sister Tracy. Just put Z on the plane. Tell me I did the right thing. Tell me she's going to be okay. The response came within seconds. Tracy always seemed to know exactly when Simone needed her. You raised an incredible kid, Sim. She's smart, she's strong, and she's got your courage. She's going to be absolutely fine. You, on the other hand, need to breathe. Actually breathe. In and out. Remember that thing doctors are supposed to do. Simone smiled weakly at her phone, took a deep breath like her sister ordered, and headed back to her car. She had a shift starting in 90 minutes. No time for anxiety. Zara would be fine. Everything would be fine. She had no idea how catastrophically wrong she was. Zara made it through security without any issues. The TSA agent had been kind, a middle-aged woman with laugh lines around her eyes who'd smiled at Zara's backpack pins and asked about the spelling bee medal. She'd found her gate easily, gate C14, following the signs and the gate numbers exactly like her mother had taught her, and settled into one of the uncomfortable plastic airport chairs to wait. Her flight didn't board for another 43 minutes, so she pulled out her journal, clicked open her favorite pen, the one with purple ink that her mother had given her for her birthday, and began to write. June 15, 6:58 a.m. First solo flight. Mom cried but tried to hide it. I saw her wipe her eyes 3 times. I'm nervous but also excited. The program starts tomorrow and I still can't believe I actually got in. I wonder if the other students will be nice or if they'll be competitive and mean. Probably both. Orchestra kids can be intense. Note to self, remember to call Mom the second the plane lands. She's probably going to worry the entire time I'm in the air. Excuse me, sweetheart, are you Zara Mitchell? Zara looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s approaching, wearing the airline's uniform and carrying a clipboard. She had warm brown eyes, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a smile that actually reached her eyes, the kind of genuine smile that made you feel immediately safe. Yes, ma'am, that's me. Wonderful. I'm Patricia Dominguez and I'm going to be helping you board today. How are you feeling? First time flying alone? Nervous? Excited? All of the above. Zara returned the smile, some of her anxiety easing. Definitely all of the above. Patricia laughed, a warm sound that made Zara think of her grandmother. That's completely normal and totally okay. I have 3 kids of my own, all grown now, but I remember when my youngest, Carlos, flew alone for the first time to visit his grandparents. He was 12 and absolutely terrified. Didn't want to admit it, of course, tried to act all tough and grown up. But I could see his hands shaking when he held his boarding pass. She sat down in the chair next to Zara, setting her clipboard on her lap. You want to know what I told him? Zara nodded. I told him that being nervous doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're doing something important, something that matters. And that's exactly what you're doing. Your mom told me about the orchestra program when she booked your ticket. That's incredible, Zara. You should be so proud. Thank you, Zara said softly, feeling the tight knot in her chest loosen just a little bit more. They chatted easily for the next several minutes. Patricia explained the boarding process, showed Zara exactly where the gate agents would scan her ticket, reminded her that she'd be in the first boarding group along with families with small children and anyone needing extra assistance. She asked about Zara's violin, whether she'd checked it or if she was carrying it on, and seemed genuinely interested when Zara explained that she'd saved for 2 years to buy a special flight case that would protect it in the overhead bin. You sound like a very responsible and talented young lady, Patricia said warmly. Your mother must be incredibly proud of you. She is, Zara said, her hand unconsciously going to the bracelet on her wrist, her mother's bracelet. She worked really hard to make this possible. I want to make her proud. Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure you already do. Every single day. Patricia glanced at her watch and stood up. I need to check on a few things before boarding starts, but I'll be right here at the gate, and I'll personally make sure you're settled in your seat before takeoff. Sound good? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Patricia squeezed Zara's shoulder gently and walked toward the gate desk to coordinate with the other agents. Zara returned to her journal, feeling significantly better about the whole situation. Maybe this wouldn't be so scary after all. Maybe flying alone was just like her mother always said, one of those things that seemed terrifying until you actually did it and realized you were stronger than you thought. She was writing about Patricia, about how one kind person could make all the difference, when a shadow fell across her journal. She looked up to see an elderly man standing nearby, moving slowly and carefully as he lowered himself into a chair 2 seats away from her. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, with deep brown skin that spoke of decades in the sun, close-cropped white hair, and thick-framed glasses that magnified kind eyes. He wore a cardigan despite the June warmth, deep burgundy with leather patches on the elbows, and a bow tie, navy blue with tiny yellow polka dots. His hands trembled slightly as he set down a worn leather briefcase, the kind that had probably carried decades worth of papers and books, its surface scratched and faded with age. Zara noticed the trembling immediately. She'd seen it before in one of her mother's regular patients, Mrs. Robertson, an elderly woman who came into the ER frequently because she lived alone and sometimes fell. Parkinson's disease, her mother had explained one night over dinner when Zara asked. It affected movement, made hands shake, got progressively worse over time. But Mrs. Robertson was always so kind, always asked about Zara's grades and her violin, always treated the ER nurses like family. The man pulled out a book, a thick hardcover about the civil rights movement, the title embossed in gold letters on a green cover, and settled in to read. Zara tried not to stare, but she was curious by nature, always had been. She wondered if he was a teacher. He had that look about him, the kind of person who'd spent a lifetime around books and students who carried knowledge like other people carried car keys. "Excuse me, young lady," the man said suddenly, and Zara realized he'd caught her looking. Heat rushed to her cheeks, embarrassment flooding through her. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to stare, that was rude of me." "No need to apologize at all," he said with a gentle smile that transformed his entire face, erasing 20 years in an instant. "I was actually going to ask if you could help me with something." He gestured toward the area near the gate where early boarders were already starting to line up. "I have a small carry-on suitcase, just one bag, but my hands don't always cooperate the way they used to. Would you mind helping me lift it into the overhead bin when we board? I'd be very grateful." "Of course," Zara said immediately, relieved that she wasn't in trouble for staring. "I'd be happy to help." The man's smile widened. "Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. My name is Leonard Washington, but most folks call me Professor Washington. Or just Professor if we're being formal, though I certainly hope we're not. Formality makes everything so stiff and uncomfortable, don't you think? I'm Zara Mitchell. It's really nice to meet you, Professor." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Zara. Are you traveling alone today?" "Yes, sir. First time, actually. I'm going to Chicago for a music program." Professor Washington's eyes lit up with genuine delight. "How wonderful. What instrument do you play?" "Violin." "Violin. Oh, that's marvelous. My granddaughter Keisha plays violin. She's a sophomore at Juilliard now, studying music education. She wants to teach, bring music to communities that don't have access to quality programs. I'm enormously proud of her." They fell into conversation as easily as old friends, the age difference between them disappearing in the shared language of music and learning. Professor Washington told Zara about Keisha, about watching her grow from a shy 6-year-old struggling with a quarter-size violin into a confident young woman preparing to change the world through music. He was traveling to Chicago, he explained, because Keisha was graduating from a summer program that very weekend, and he wouldn't miss it for the world. "I taught history for 42 years, Professor Washington said, his trembling hands steady when he held his book, as if the weight of knowledge stabilized them. "American history, the civil rights movement, African American studies. Officially retired 3 years ago, but I still guest lecture occasionally at my old university and a few others nearby. Can't quite give it up, you see. Teaching is in my blood." "What was it like?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. "Teaching about the civil rights movement? Were you there?" Professor Washington smiled, but there was something sad in it now, something heavy with memory. "I was 13 years old in 1963. Watched the March on Washington on our old black and white television, heard Dr. King give his 'I Have a Dream' speech. My mother cried. My father sat completely silent, which was unusual for him, just stared at that screen like he was watching something impossible become real. I didn't fully understand the significance then, thought I did, but I didn't. Not really. It would be years before I grasped what that moment meant, What those people sacrificed so that kids like you could fly across the country to attend prestigious music programs without thinking twice about whether you'd be allowed through the door. Zara absorbed this, adding it to her growing understanding of the world. Is that why you became a history teacher? Partly. But mostly because my wife, God rest her soul, told me I talked too much and I might as well get paid for it. Zara laughed, surprised by his humor, and Professor Washington chuckled along with her. Her name was Dorothy. We were married for 47 years before cancer took her 5 years ago. She taught English literature for 35 of those years, had more books in our house than the public library, corrected my grammar even on our wedding day. He touched the bow tie gently, reverently. This was her favorite. She said it made me look distinguished instead of like an absent-minded professor. I wear it whenever I travel. Helps me feel like she's still with me, offering commentary on everything I do. I'm so sorry about your wife, Zara said quietly, and she meant it. She understood loss, had felt it when her grandmother passed 2 years ago, that strange emptiness of someone being gone who'd always been there. Thank you, sweetheart. But you know what? 47 years with the love of your life is more than most people get. I consider myself lucky. He paused, noticing the bracelet on Zara's wrist, the way she touched it unconsciously whenever she felt uncertain. That's beautiful. A gift. From my mom. She gave it to me this morning before I left. Said it would keep me safe. Smart woman, your mother. And I have no doubt it will. When boarding was called, Group 1 first, including families with children and passengers needing extra time, Professor Washington retrieved his small wheeled suitcase, and true to her word, Zara helped him lift it into the overhead compartment. It wasn't particularly heavy, maybe 20 pounds, but she could see the relief in his face at not having to struggle with it, at not drawing attention to his condition, at being able to maintain his dignity in a world that too often equated physical limitation with incompetence. Thank you, Zara. You're a kind soul. You're welcome, Professor. Their seats weren't together. Zara was in 16A, a window seat toward the middle of the plane, and Professor Washington was in 18C, an aisle seat just 2 rows behind her. But knowing he was nearby made Zara feel less alone, less like a small child adrift in a world of strangers and more like a person on an adventure who'd made an unexpected friend. Patricia checked on Zara one final time before takeoff, making sure she had everything she needed, reminding her that she could press the call button if she needed anything during the flight, and introducing her to the other flight attendants who'd be working the flight. The plane was a mid-size aircraft, nothing fancy, with 3 seats on each side of a single aisle. It was about 70% full, a typical Tuesday morning mix of business travelers in expensive suits typing urgently on laptops, families trying to keep excited children entertained, a young couple who couldn't stop holding hands and giggling together, clearly newlyweds or close to it, and scattered solo travelers reading books or staring at their phones. Zara settled into her window seat, stowing her purple backpack under the seat in front of her but keeping her journal out because she wanted to document everything. The feeling of the seat beneath her, surprisingly comfortable despite what everyone said about airplane seats. The sound of the engines warming up, a low rumble that she felt in her chest. The way her stomach fluttered with nervous excitement, like 1,000 butterflies had taken flight inside her. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, and unlike most passengers who ignored it completely, having seen it 100 times, Zara watched with complete attention. She noted where the exits were, 2 in the front, 2 over the wings, 2 in the back. She watched how the oxygen masks worked, how you were supposed to put your own on first before helping others, which seemed counterintuitive but made sense when you thought about it. She paid attention to the water landing procedures even though they'd be flying over land the entire time, because her mother had taught her that preparation mattered, that the difference between panic and survival was often just knowing what to do. There were 3 flight attendants working the flight. Patricia, the kind woman who'd helped Zara at the gate, working the first-class cabin at the front of the plane. A younger woman, probably late 20s, with warm brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a genuinely friendly smile, stationed at the back of the plane. And in the middle section where Zara sat, was the senior flight attendant. Her name was Diane Hartley, and from the very first moment Zara saw her, something felt wrong. Diane was in her early 40s with sharp features and blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun so tight it looked painful, not a single strand out of place. Her makeup was perfect, almost unnaturally so, like a mask painted on. She wore the standard airline uniform, crisp and pressed with military precision, a name tag pinned perfectly straight, shoes polished to a mirror shine. She moved through the aisle with mechanical efficiency, checking overhead bins with sharp snaps, reminding passengers to stow their bags properly with a voice that was technically polite but somehow devoid of any actual warmth. When she reached Zara's row, she stopped. She looked at Zara's boarding pass, then at Zara, then back at the boarding pass, her eyes narrowing slightly. Seat 16A? Diane's voice was clipped, sharp. Yes, ma'am, Zara replied politely, exactly as her mother had taught her. Diane stared at her for a long moment, her gaze moving from Zara to the other passengers in the row. To Zara's left in 16B sat a white man in his 50s, expensive suit, designer watch, already absorbed in his laptop. Across the aisle in 16C was an elderly white woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, reading a hardcover novel with a bookmark embroidered with flowers. Let me see your boarding pass again. Zara handed it over, confused. Diane examined it closely, holding it up to the light as if checking for watermarks, as if looking for some proof that it was forged. And you're traveling alone? Yes, ma'am. I'm an unaccompanied minor. Patricia Dominguez helped me board. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. She handed the boarding pass back without another word and moved on, but Zara felt the weight of her stare linger even after she'd gone. The businessman in 16B glanced at Zara and smiled sympathetically, lowering his voice so only she could hear. First time flying? Yes, sir. You're doing great. Don't let her intimidate you. Some flight attendants forget that customer service is part of the job description. He extended his hand. Daniel Turner. I'm a lawyer, fly this route constantly for work. Zara Mitchell. Nice to meet you, Mr. Turner. Call me Daniel. And seriously, if you need anything during the flight, just ask. I've got noise-canceling headphones, snacks, you name it. Flying alone can be overwhelming. Thank you, Zara said, genuinely grateful for his kindness. 2 rows back, Diane stopped at Professor Washington's seat. He was settling in, carefully placing his book in the seat pocket, adjusting his seatbelt with hands that trembled despite his best efforts. Sir, do you need special assistance? Diane asked loudly, her voice carrying through the cabin, drawing attention from nearby passengers. Professor Washington looked up, surprised by her tone. No, thank you. I'm perfectly fine. Are you certain? Because if you have mobility issues, we need to know before takeoff. It's a safety concern. I assure you, ma'am, I'm quite capable of moving independently. Sir, I can see that your hands are shaking quite severely. If you have a medical condition that might impair your ability to exit the aircraft in an emergency, you're required by federal regulations to inform the flight crew. Several passengers had stopped their conversations now, watching. Professor Washington's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm and dignified. I have a mild tremor. Essential tremor, actually, not Parkinson's as many people assume, though they can appear similar. It does not in any way impair my mobility or ability to follow emergency procedures. I've been flying for over 50 years without incident. Still, I need to make a note of it. What other symptoms do you have? Do you take medication? Are you prone to falls? Ma'am, my medical history is private and not relevant to this flight. Sir, I'm trying to ensure the safety of all passengers. And I'm trying to sit down and read my book in peace. The words came out sharper than Professor Washington had intended, years of similar interrogations bubbling to the surface. Diane's face flushed slightly, but she didn't move. There's no need to be difficult, sir. I'm simply doing my job. Then perhaps do your job without making assumptions about what I can and cannot do based on a tremor that I've managed successfully for 2 decades. Diane stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment, then turned and walked toward the front of the plane without another word. But the damage was done. Professor Washington sat in his seat, breathing slowly, trying to calm the anger that threatened to overwhelm him. He'd been through this before, too many times to count. The assumptions, the public interrogations, the way people treated physical difference as if it were mental incompetence. Zara had heard the entire exchange from 2 rows up. She'd watched it unfold, had seen the way Diane spoke to Professor Washington, the volume, the condescension, the way she'd drawn attention to him. And something twisted in her stomach, something that her mother had tried to prepare her for but that she'd never fully experienced herself. She pulled out her journal and began to write, her purple pen moving quickly across the page. 10:15 a.m. before takeoff. The senior flight attendant, Diane Hartley, checked my boarding pass twice. She looked at me, then at the other passengers around me, then back at me. Like I didn't belong here. Then she stopped at Professor Washington's seat and asked loudly if he needed special assistance. He said no, but she kept pushing, asking about his tremor, asking about medication, talking loud enough that everyone could hear. He finally told her to let him read in peace and she walked away looking angry. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but something feels wrong. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to taxi toward the runway. Zara gripped her armrests, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and residual unease from what she'd just witnessed. This was it. She was really doing this. The plane turned onto the runway, paused for a moment, and then the engines reached a deafening crescendo as they accelerated. The takeoff was smooth, surprisingly so. The plane lifted off the ground and Zara felt that strange moment of weightlessness, of leaving Earth behind. She pressed her face to the window, watching the ground fall away, watching buildings and cars and people shrink to the size of toys. It was simultaneously terrifying and beautiful, this view from above, this perspective that made everything seem small and manageable. Once they reached cruising altitude, 35,000 feet above the ground, the seatbelt sign dinged off with a soft chime, and passengers began to settle into their flights. Some pulled out laptops and immediately dove into work, fingers flying across keyboards. Others reclined their seats and closed their eyes, hoping to nap through the 2-hour and 40-minute flight. A few children in the back started getting restless, parents trying to keep them entertained with tablets and coloring books. The cabin filled with the low hum of conversation, the rustle of magazines, the occasional announcement from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richard Alvarez speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather looks clear all the way to Chicago, and we're expecting an on-time arrival. Sit back, relax, and our flight attendants will be coming through shortly with beverage service. Thank you for flying with us today. Zara opened her journal again and began documenting the experience. The way the clouds looked from above like fields of white cotton you could walk across. The feeling of being suspended between earth and sky. The strange isolation of being surrounded by people but completely alone. She was writing about her mother, about how proud she hoped to make her, when she noticed something. Diane had begun the beverage service, moving through the cabin with her cart, offering drinks and snacks. And Zara watched, really watched, the way her mother had taught her to observe, to notice patterns. With certain passengers, the white families, the business travelers in expensive suits, Daniel Turner in his seat next to Zara, Diane was warmer. Not warm exactly, but warmer than she'd been before. She smiled, asked if they needed extra napkins, offered them full cans of soda instead of the plastic cups most airlines used. She made small talk, commented on laptop stickers, asked the businessman about his destination. But with others her service changed. With the Hispanic family in row 20, parents trying to manage 2 small children, she was curt, practically threw the drinks at them, didn't offer any snacks even when the children asked politely. With the young black man in 14D, a college student from his appearance, wearing a university sweatshirt and typing intently on his laptop, she barely made eye contact, set his cup down so carelessly that it nearly spilled. And when she reached Professor Washington, she didn't stop at all. Just pushed her cart right past him as if he wasn't there, as if he hadn't pressed the call button to request a water. Zara watched him press the button again, the light above his seat illuminating. Diane was 3 rows ahead now, still serving passengers, clearly seeing the light but choosing to ignore it. Zara pulled out her journal and wrote quickly, noting times, describing what she'd seen, capturing exact phrases when she could remember them. 10:47 a.m. Beverage service. Diane gave Mr. Turner a full can of Coke and extra pretzels. Asked him about his work, smiled at him. With the Hispanic family in row 20, she barely spoke, didn't offer them full cans, looked annoyed when their little boy asked for juice. She completely skipped Professor Washington even though he pressed the call button twice. The light is still on above his seat and she's ignoring it. She underlined that last sentence, her pen pressing hard into the paper. Around the 90-minute mark of the flight, Zara needed to use the bathroom. She'd been holding it, not wanting to cause any problems, not wanting to draw Diane's attention. But she really couldn't wait anymore. She unbuckled her seatbelt and glanced down the aisle. Both bathrooms in the coach section had occupied signs lit up, small lines forming near each one. Parents with children, business travelers, normal bathroom line dynamics. Zara looked toward the front of the plane. The first-class bathroom was clearly unoccupied, the indicators showing it was available. She remembered the airline's policy because her mother, being thorough in that way that had kept her alive in the ER for 15 years, had made Zara read through the entire passenger information guide the night before. She'd highlighted relevant sections, including the one about lavatories. When coach bathrooms are occupied, passengers are permitted to use first-class facilities. It was policy. It was allowed. She wasn't breaking any rules. Zara stood up and walked toward the front of the plane, her heart beating a little faster but feeling confident that she was doing exactly what the airline's own rules said she could do. She made it exactly 6 steps before Diane appeared in front of her like a wall, blocking her path completely. "Where do you think you're going?" Zara looked up at her, at this woman who towered over her, who seemed to fill the entire aisle. "The bathroom, ma'am. The ones in the back are occupied." "That bathroom," Diane said, her voice cold enough to freeze, gesturing toward the first-class lavatory, "is for first-class passengers only. But the airline policy says." "I don't care what you think the policy says. That bathroom is not for you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning that went far beyond bathroom access. "Not for you. Not for people like you." The subtext was clear as daylight to anyone paying attention. "But the sign says it's available." Zara tried again, her voice smaller now, uncertainty creeping in. "The sign says a lot of things. Now return to your seat and wait your turn like everyone else." Zara felt tears prick her eyes, but she absolutely refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Diane that satisfaction. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't. Daniel Turner had been working on his laptop, had his noise-canceling headphones on, but he'd seen the exchange. He pulled the headphones off and stood up, stepping into the aisle behind Zara. "Excuse me, but she's right. I fly this airline 3 times a week. When the economy lavatories are occupied, passengers are explicitly allowed to use first-class facilities. It's your own company policy." Diane turned her cold gaze on him, her expression hardening. "Sir, I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I determine how facilities are used. That's actually not how it works. The policy is. If you continue to interfere with my duties, I will report you to the captain and have law enforcement meet you at the gate for interfering with flight crew operations. Is that really how you want to end your business trip?" Daniel stood there, a man who'd spent 20 years in courtrooms arguing cases, who'd faced down opposing counsel and hostile judges, who prided himself on standing up for what was right, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of the consequences of being right. He looked down at Zara, at this small child who was clearly fighting back tears, and felt ashamed of himself. But he stepped back. Diane smiled, a thin, cold smile that held no warmth or kindness. "Now, little girl, return to your seat. Immediately." Zara walked back, her face burning with humiliation. She could feel people watching her, could sense their discomfort and pity. She slid into her seat and immediately grabbed her journal, her hands shaking as she wrote. 11:32 a.m. Tried to use first-class bathroom because coach bathrooms were full. Diane stopped me. Said that bathroom wasn't for me. Exact words, "That bathroom is not for you." Mr. Turner tried to help, quoted the airline policy, but Diane threatened to have police meet him at the gate for interfering with flight crew. He backed down. I don't blame him. I'm sitting here needing to use the bathroom and she won't let me. This isn't about rules. This is about something else. Something worse. She sat there for 8 minutes, watching her watch, feeling her discomfort grow, until finally the line at the coach bathroom cleared. She practically ran to use it, locking the door behind her and letting herself cry for just a moment, quietly, because she didn't want anyone to hear her fall apart. When she emerged, her eyes red but dry, Professor Washington was standing near the bathroom waiting his turn. He saw her face and knew immediately that something had happened. "Zara, what's wrong?" She told him everything in a whisper, the words tumbling out. The bathroom incident. The threat to Daniel. The way Diane had spoken to her. The look in her eyes that said Zara was less than, was other, was someone who needed to know her place. Professor Washington listened, and with every word Zara spoke, his expression grew darker. This wasn't new to him. This was a story he'd lived 1,000 variations of over 76 years. But hearing it happen to this brilliant, kind child, seeing her confusion and hurt, ignited something in him. Did anyone record it? I think the teenager across from me had his phone up. I'm not sure. Okay. Listen to me very carefully, Zara. What's happening here is not your fault. Not even a little bit. That woman is showing you exactly who she is, and it's ugly. But you're handling this with grace and maturity that most adults don't possess. What do I do? Zara whispered, her voice breaking. You document everything, which I can see you're already doing. He gestured to the journal clutched in her hands. And if things escalate, if you feel unsafe for even a second, you speak up. Loud. You hear me? Zara nodded, but inside she felt a knot of fear tightening around her chest. What if things did escalate? What if Diane did something worse? She was stuck on this plane for another hour with someone who clearly didn't like her, and there was nowhere to go, no way to escape. The answer to Zara's unspoken question came 40 minutes later. Zara had returned to her seat and was trying to focus on her journal, documenting everything in careful detail, when she felt eyes on her. She looked up to find Diane standing in the aisle, staring at her with an expression that made Zara's stomach drop. "Give me your journal." Zara's grip tightened on the book. "What?" "I said give me your journal. I've been watching you scribble in that thing all flight. Electronic devices are supposed to be in airplane mode, and I need to verify you're not using some kind of device that could interfere with the aircraft's navigation systems." "It's just a journal," Zara said, her voice trembling now. "Just paper and a pen." "Then you won't mind me looking at it to confirm that?" "Yes, I will mind. It's private." The word came out before Zara could stop it, but once it was spoken she didn't want to take it back. This journal contained everything. All her documentation. All her evidence. All her careful observations of every microaggression, every discriminatory act, every moment of unfair treatment. She wasn't giving it to Diane. She couldn't. Diane's face flushed red, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. "Excuse me? It's my private journal. You can't just take it. I'm a member of the flight crew, and if I deem something a potential safety risk." "A paper notebook isn't a safety risk," Daniel Turner interjected, unable to stay silent anymore despite the earlier threat. "You're harassing a child. Sir, this is your final warning." "No," Daniel said, standing up fully now, his lawyer voice coming out, the one he used in courtrooms when he knew he had the moral and legal high ground. "This is your final warning. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights law, and what you're doing right now is harassment and discrimination. That child has broken no rules, violated no policies, and has been nothing but polite since boarding. You, on the other hand, have targeted her and the elderly gentleman in 18C from the moment you saw them. I've been documenting everything. I have video. And I will be filing a formal complaint the moment we land." Other passengers were murmuring now, shifting in their seats, pulling out their own phones. The teenager across the aisle was recording openly. A middle-aged black woman several rows back called out, "She's right, you've been nasty to certain passengers this whole flight." Diane looked around, realizing that the cabin was turning against her, that her carefully maintained authority was crumbling. She was losing control, and for someone who'd built her entire identity around being in control, around being the one who made the rules, it was unbearable. "Everyone needs to calm down and return to their seats," she said, her voice too loud now, too sharp, panic creeping in around the edges. "We are in our seats," Daniel replied calmly. "And you need to step away from that child and leave her alone." Diane opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, there was movement from the back of the plane. Professor Washington had stood up and was making his way forward, walking carefully but with unmistakable purpose. When he reached Zara's row, he stopped and looked directly at Diane, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the entire cabin with the authority of someone who'd spent 42 years commanding classrooms full of students. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from this child right now." "Sir, you need to sit down. I'm a retired professor of history with a specialization in civil rights law and discriminatory practices. What you're doing right now, what you've been doing this entire flight, is textbook discrimination. You've targeted this child and myself based on nothing but the color of our skin. You've violated airline policy, federal anti-discrimination statutes, and basic human decency." His voice wasn't loud, didn't need to be. It carried weight earned over decades of teaching, of fighting, of refusing to be diminished. "I've watched you allow white passengers to do things you've explicitly forbidden this child from doing. I've documented every instance of your discriminatory treatment. I've noted the timestamps, the witnesses, the specific language you've used. And if you don't step away from her right now, I will personally ensure that not only do you lose your job, but that you face federal charges for violating civil rights on a commercial aircraft, which is, I should mention, a felony offense." The cabin was utterly silent now. Even the children had stopped making noise. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Diane's face went through a range of colors, from red to white to almost gray. "You're threatening me?" "I'm educating you," Professor Washington said calmly. "There's a significant difference. You see, threatening would be if I said I would cause you harm. What I'm doing is informing you of the legal consequences of your actions. That's not a threat. That's a public service." For a long moment, nobody moved. The air in the cabin felt electric, charged with tension and the promise of something breaking. Then Diane, her hands shaking now just like Professor Washington's but for entirely different reasons, stepped back from Zara's seat. "This isn't over," she muttered, her voice low and venomous. You're absolutely right about that, Professor Washington replied. It's not over. It's actually just beginning. Diane turned and walked quickly toward the front of the plane, disappearing behind the first-class curtain. The moment she was gone, the cabin erupted. Not in chaos, but in a strange mixture of relief, anger, and solidarity. Passengers turned to each other, comparing notes on what they'd witnessed. The teenager with his phone was already airdropping his video to several other passengers. Daniel Turner pulled out his business card and handed it to Professor Washington. My firm specializes in civil rights cases. Whatever you need, call me. No charge. Professor Washington took the card, then pulled out one of his own. And you call me when you need an expert witness. I've testified in a dozen cases just like this one. Then he turned to Zara and sat down in the empty middle seat between her and Daniel, the seat that Daniel had silently offered by moving to the aisle. You okay, sweetheart? Zara shook her head, tears finally spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. I don't understand why she hates me. I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't. And that's exactly the point, Zara. People like her, they don't need a reason. They don't need you to do something wrong. They just need a target for their hate, and they choose people who look like us because they think we're easy targets. Because they think we'll stay quiet. But why? Zara's voice broke on the word. Why would someone just hate people for no reason? Professor Washington was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. This was the conversation he'd had with students for 4 decades, the conversation black parents had with their children for generations, the conversation that broke your heart every single time because children shouldn't have to learn this. There are people in this world who are afraid, Zara. Afraid of change, afraid of losing power, afraid of a world where everyone is treated equally because then they'd have to succeed on merit instead of on the color of their skin. And fear makes people cruel. Fear makes them small. But here's what you need to understand, and I want you to really hear this. Her hatred, her fear, her cruelty, none of that is about you. It's about her. It's about what's broken inside of her. You are brilliant, kind, talented, and strong. You haven't done a single thing wrong. She's the one who should be ashamed. He gestured around the cabin, where passengers were nodding in agreement, where people of all races were visibly upset about what they'd witnessed. Look around. You have witnesses. You have allies. You have people who saw exactly what happened and know it was wrong. You're not alone in this, even though I know it feels that way. Zara wiped her eyes, taking shaky breaths, trying to calm down. What do we do now? Now, Professor Washington said, you keep documenting. You write down everything that happened, exact quotes if you can remember them. And when we land, we report this. Officially. To the airline, to the authorities, to whoever will listen. But what if they don't believe us? Then we make them believe us. We have video evidence from at least 4 different phones. We have dozens of witnesses. We have your journal full of contemporaneous notes, which any lawyer will tell you is powerful evidence. And we have something even more important than all of that. What? We have the truth. And the truth has a way of winning eventually, even when it takes longer than it should. Up at the front of the plane, behind the first-class curtain, Diane was spiraling. Patricia, the kind flight attendant who'd helped Zara board, approached carefully, her expression a mixture of concern and anger. Diane, what on earth happened back there? I could hear the commotion all the way up here. Nothing, Diane snapped. Passengers making trouble, thinking they can talk to crew however they want. That's not what it sounded like. It sounded like you were harassing a child. I was doing my job. That girl was being difficult, and that old man was interfering. Diane. Patricia's voice was sharp now, cutting through the excuses. I've been flying with you for 3 years. I've heard the complaints. I've seen how you treat certain passengers differently than others. I've ignored it because I didn't want to believe it was what I thought it was. But I heard you out there. I heard what you said to that child. I didn't say anything wrong. You told her a bathroom wasn't for her. A bathroom, Diane. You segregated a child from using a bathroom. Diane's face went pale. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? Explain it to me. Explain how you've been checking that girl's ticket multiple times, how you've been hovering around her since boarding, how you interrogated the elderly black man about his medical conditions in front of the entire plane, how you've treated them differently than every other passenger in that cabin. You're making this into something it's not. No, Diane. You made this into exactly what it is. And I'm reporting it to the captain. You wouldn't dare. Watch me. Patricia picked up the phone that connected directly to the cockpit, her hand steady even though her heart was racing. This was the right thing to do, but she knew it would have consequences. Diane was dating Tom Whitmore, the airline's regional manager. Tom had a reputation for protecting Diane, for making complaints disappear, for ensuring she never faced any real consequences no matter how many passengers reported her behavior. But there were video recordings now. There were witnesses. This couldn't be buried. The phone was answered immediately. Cockpit. Captain Alvarez, this is Patricia in first class. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Alvarez felt his stomach drop. He'd been flying for 23 years, had handled emergency landings, engine failures, medical emergencies. But we have a situation. In that particular tone of voice meant something different. It meant the kind of problem that ended careers. Go ahead, Patricia. Patricia explained everything, keeping her voice calm and professional even though she was furious. The way Diane had treated the unaccompanied minor from the moment she boarded. The bathroom incident. The attempted confiscation of the child's journal. The confrontation with passengers. The fact that multiple people were recording and talking about lawsuits. Richard closed his eyes, taking a long, slow breath. He knew Diane. They'd flown together dozens of times. She was efficient, professional on the surface, always followed protocol to the letter. But he'd heard whispers, complaints that filtered through the grapevine, passengers who'd reported discriminatory treatment that somehow never made it into her official record. And he knew why. Tom Whitmore had been running interference for her for years. Every complaint mysteriously lost, every investigation quietly dropped, every disciplinary action buried under administrative red tape. But you couldn't bury video evidence. You couldn't make dozens of witnesses disappear. And you definitely couldn't make a 911 call from a plane go away. Patch me through to the cabin. A moment later, his voice came over the speakers, calm and authoritative in that way that pilots learn to sound even when everything is falling apart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Alvarez. I want to personally apologize for any disruption to your flight today. Please know that the safety and comfort of all passengers is our highest priority, and we take any concerns extremely seriously. We're approximately 35 minutes from landing in Chicago. I ask that everyone please remain calm and seated. Flight crew, I need all senior staff to meet me in the rear galley immediately after landing. It was a carefully worded message, professional and calm, but Diane heard the subtext loud and clear. She was in serious trouble. For the remaining 30 minutes of the flight, Diane stayed in the first-class section, not making eye contact with anyone, her face pale and her hands shaking. Kelly Martinez, the younger flight attendant who'd been working the back of the plane and had witnessed everything with growing horror, took over service in the middle cabin. She was extra kind to Zara, bringing her a full can of ginger ale and a whole package of cookies without being asked, her eyes conveying an apology that words couldn't fully express. I'm so sorry about what happened, Kelly whispered, crouching down next to Zara's seat so they could talk privately. That wasn't okay. None of it was okay. Thank you, Zara managed, her voice still shaky. I should have said something sooner. I saw how she was treating you and Professor Washington, and I didn't speak up because I was afraid of making waves, afraid of being the junior flight attendant who caused problems. Kelly's eyes were wet with unshed tears. That was wrong of me. I'm sorry. You're speaking up now, Professor Washington said gently. That matters. Kelly nodded, squeezed Zara's shoulder gently and returned to her duties. But the guilt sat heavy in her chest. How many other times had she stayed silent when she should have spoken? How many other passengers had been treated this way while she looked the other way? Professor Washington stayed in the seat next to Zara for the rest of the flight, occasionally checking on her, pointing out the window as they passed over Lake Michigan, trying to distract her from the weight of everything that had happened. But Zara couldn't stop thinking about her mother's words that morning, words that had seemed so simple then but now carried profound weight. If something doesn't feel right, you make noise. She pulled out her phone, the old one her mother had given her for emergencies only, the one she was supposed to keep in airplane mode unless something was seriously wrong. Her hands shook as she stared at the screen, at the decision point that would change everything. Was this an emergency? She looked at her journal, at pages and pages of careful documentation. She looked at the bruise forming on her arm where Diane had grabbed her earlier, a mark she hadn't mentioned to anyone yet because she'd been too shocked to process it. She looked at Professor Washington, this kind man who'd stood up for her even though it could have made everything worse for him. She looked around the cabin at all these strangers who'd become witnesses, who'd refused to stay silent. And she made her decision. She turned off airplane mode and dialed 911. The operator answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Zara took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady in a way that surprised even her. My name is Zara Mitchell. I'm 11 years old, and I'm on Flight 772 departing from my home airport going to Chicago. A flight attendant has been hurting passengers. She grabbed my arm earlier and left bruises. She won't let an elderly man use the bathroom because of his medical condition. She told me a bathroom wasn't for people like me. I have everything written down in my journal. I have timestamps and exact quotes. There are multiple witnesses and people recording on their phones. We're landing in about 25 minutes, and I need police to meet us at the gate because what she's doing isn't just mean. It's illegal. And my mother taught me that when something is wrong, when an adult is hurting people and won't stop, you don't stay quiet. You speak up. You call for help. Lisa Rodriguez, the 911 operator, had been doing this job for 18 years. She'd taken calls from every imaginable situation: home invasions, car accidents, domestic violence, medical emergencies. She'd heard people at their worst, at their most desperate, at their most terrified. But she'd never, not once in 18 years, received a call from someone on an airplane mid-flight. And the calm courage in this 11-year-old's voice, the clarity of her thinking, the way she documented everything like a trained investigator, it brought tears to Lisa's eyes. Zara, sweetie, you did exactly the right thing by calling. I'm dispatching officers and airport security to meet your flight right now. Can you tell me, are you safe at this moment? Is anyone threatening you right now? Yes, ma'am, I'm safe right now. The flight attendant is staying at the front of the plane. But I needed someone official to know what happened. I needed it on record so it can't be erased or covered up. Lisa felt her throat tighten with emotion. This child, this incredibly brave child, understood institutional protection, understood how complaints disappeared, understood that creating an official record mattered. How many adults didn't grasp that? It's on record now, Zara. Everything you've told me is documented in our system with a timestamp. The officers meeting your flight will have access to this recording. And I want you to know something, okay? You are incredibly, incredibly brave. What you did today, speaking up, documenting, calling for help, that's what heroes do. When Zara hung up, she looked at Professor Washington, who'd heard every word of the conversation. His eyes were wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. You just changed everything, he said quietly. You know that, right? Zara nodded, but she felt numb, like she was watching everything happen to someone else. I had to. My mom said if something's wrong, you don't stay quiet. Your mother is a very wise woman. And she raised an extraordinary daughter. The plane began its descent, that subtle shift in angle and air pressure that signals the end of a flight. The captain's voice came over the speakers one final time. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Diane moved through the first-class cabin mechanically, checking that seatbelts were fastened, tray tables up, seats in their upright positions. But her hands were shaking now, and her perfect facade had cracked completely. She knew what was waiting for her on the ground. She knew her career was over. And some small part of her, buried under years of resentment and fear and hatred, knew that she'd done this to herself. The landing was smooth, the plane touching down gently and rolling to a stop at the gate. Usually, passengers would immediately stand up, grabbing bags from overhead bins, pushing toward the exits with typical post-flight impatience. But this time, everyone stayed seated, an unspoken agreement hanging in the air. They were waiting to see what happened next. Captain Alvarez's voice came through one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have law enforcement boarding the aircraft. This will only take a few moments. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Through the plane's windows, passengers could see the police cars, the airport security vehicles, the coordinated response to a child's cry for help. Diane saw them too and felt something inside her collapse entirely. The plane's door opened and Detective Angela Morrison boarded first, flanked by two uniformed officers. Angela was 43 years old, a 15-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, a mother of 3 daughters, and a black woman who'd spent her entire career navigating systems that weren't built for people who looked like her. When she'd gotten the dispatch about a child calling 911 from a plane, reporting discrimination and assault, something fierce and protective had awakened in her. Captain Alvarez met them at the entrance, his face grim. Detective Morrison? I'm Captain Richard Alvarez. I have incident reports from 2 flight attendants and I've pulled the relevant data from our flight recorders. Thank you, Captain. We'll need to interview the child who made the call, the complainant she mentioned, any witnesses, and the flight attendant in question. Of course. The child is in seat 16A. Zara Mitchell, 11 years old, unaccompanied minor. The elderly gentleman she mentioned is Professor Leonard Washington in 18C. And the flight attendant is Diane Hartley, currently in the first-class galley. Angela nodded and moved through the cabin, her trained eyes taking in everything. The passengers watching quietly, some with their phones still out. The young flight attendant who looked like she'd been crying. And then she saw Zara, small and scared in her window seat, clutching a journal to her chest like armor. Angela approached slowly, making herself smaller, less intimidating. She crouched down next to Zara's row so they were at eye level. "Hi Zara. I'm Detective Angela Morrison. You were incredibly brave to call 911. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Zara said, but her voice shook slightly, betraying the truth. "Can you show me your arm, sweetie? You mentioned someone grabbed you?" Zara pushed up her sleeve, revealing the bruises that had darkened over the past 2 hours, clear handprint marks on her small arm. Angela photographed them carefully, documenting the evidence with professional detachment even though rage burned in her chest. Someone had put their hands on this child hard enough to leave marks. "Zara, I need you to tell me everything that happened. Take your time. Start from the beginning." And Zara did. She spoke clearly, calmly, referring to her journal for exact timestamps and quotes. She described every incident, every microaggression, every discriminatory act. She explained how Diane had checked her ticket multiple times, interrogated Professor Washington about his medical condition, refused to let her use an available bathroom, threatened other passengers who tried to help. She showed Angela the pages and pages of documentation, the careful observations of a child who'd been taught that evidence matters. Angela listened, asking clarifying questions, taking notes, her respect for this 11-year-old growing with every word. Then she turned to Professor Washington. "Professor Washington? I understand you were also targeted by the flight attendant." Leonard provided his statement with the eloquence of someone who'd spent 42 years teaching, describing each incident in detail, providing context about discrimination law, explaining why each act constituted a violation of federal civil rights statutes. He was a prosecutor's dream witness, articulate and knowledgeable and utterly credible. Next, Angela interviewed Daniel Turner, the civil rights lawyer, who not only provided his own detailed account but also had business cards from 4 other passengers who wanted to serve as witnesses. The teenager who'd recorded multiple incidents transferred his videos to the detective's tablet. The elderly white woman from across the aisle gave a statement about how appalled and disgusted she'd been by Diane's behavior. Kelly Martinez, the younger flight attendant, provided her statement with tears streaming down her face, admitting that she'd witnessed the discriminatory treatment and hadn't spoken up soon enough, that she'd been afraid of retaliation, that she should have done more. "But I'm speaking up now," Kelly said, her voice shaking but determined. "I'm telling you everything I saw over the past 3 months of flying with Diane. The complaints that disappeared. The passengers she treated differently. The way she'd change her behavior when supervisors were around." Finally, Angela approached Diane, who was sitting in the first-class galley, her perfect makeup smudged from crying, her severe bun coming undone. "Ms. Hartley, I'm Detective Angela Morrison. I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with passengers on this flight." "I want a lawyer," Diane said immediately, her voice hoarse. "That child is lying. This is a setup. I've been set up." Angela's expression didn't change, but she felt a familiar disappointment. How many times had she heard this? How many people caught doing wrong immediately claimed they were the real victims? "Ma'am, we have 7 separate video recordings from different passengers, 23 witness statements, flight recorder data, a 911 call recording and physical evidence of assault on a minor. You have the right to remain silent and you have the right to an attorney. But I want you to understand that this isn't going away, and denying what happened when we have this much evidence will only make things worse for you." She read Diane her Miranda rights in a calm, professional voice while passengers watched through the gaps in seats. When she finished, she asked Diane to stand. "Ms. Hartley, you're being placed under arrest for simple assault, interference with flight operations and federal civil rights violations. You're going to need to come with us." The cabin was completely silent as Diane was led through the aisle in handcuffs. Some passengers looked away, uncomfortable with watching someone's life fall apart. Others stared openly, wanting her to see their faces, wanting her to know that they'd witnessed what she'd done. Professor Washington watched her pass with an expression that wasn't triumph or satisfaction, just deep, bone-weary sadness at the continuation of a story he'd lived too many times. When Diane reached Zara's row, she stopped for just a moment, looking down at this child who'd brought her world crashing down. And Zara looked back, not with hatred or satisfaction, but with something Diane found even more devastating: pity. Then Diane was escorted off the plane, and the cabin erupted in applause. But Zara didn't feel like celebrating. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained, like someone had wrung every feeling out of her and left her hollow. She just wanted her mother. As if summoned by the thought, Simone burst through the airplane door, having driven like a maniac from 3 states away the moment the airline called to inform her of the situation. She'd made an 18-hour drive in 12, running on pure adrenaline and maternal panic. Zara. Zara looked up, saw her mother, and the dam broke completely. She unbuckled and ran down the aisle, and Simone caught her, lifting her up even though she was really getting too big to be carried, holding her daughter like she'd never let go. "Baby, oh my baby, are you okay? Did anyone hurt you? Let me see you, let me look at you." Simone examined her daughter frantically, seeing the bruises on her arm, the tears streaking her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. And she felt a rage so pure and protective that it scared her. "Who did this? Who put their hands on my daughter?" "She's been arrested, ma'am," Detective Morrison said, approaching carefully. "I'm Detective Angela Morrison. Your daughter is one of the bravest people I've ever met. She did everything right. Everything." Simone held Zara tighter, rocking her slightly, pressing kisses to her forehead. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry you had to go through this alone." "I wasn't alone," Zara said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Professor Washington helped me. And Mr. Turner. And lots of other people spoke up." Professor Washington had approached quietly, not wanting to intrude but wanting to make sure Zara was okay. Simone saw him and immediately pulled him into their embrace, this stranger who'd protected her daughter when she couldn't. "Thank you," Simone whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for being there for her." "She protected herself," Professor Washington said gently. "I just stood beside her." "But Dr. Mitchell, your daughter is extraordinary. What she did today, the way she documented everything, the way she stayed calm and called for help, that's because of you. Because of what you taught her." The airport had arranged for them to give statements in a private area rather than the busy terminal. Media had already gotten wind of the story, reporters with cameras gathering outside, but airport security kept them at bay. Simone sat with Zara the entire time, holding her hand while Detective Morrison took their formal statements. Then came the medical examination to document Zara's injuries, photographs of the bruises, measurements, official evidence for the case that would be built against Diane. Simone stayed strong through all of it, the doctor and her taking over, making sure everything was done properly. But inside she was shattering. By the time they were finally cleared to leave, it had been 4 hours since the plane landed. Simone was exhausted, Zara was barely conscious, and Professor Washington looked like he'd aged a decade. "Can we give you a ride somewhere, Professor?" Simone asked. "My granddaughter is picking me up, but thank you. I wanted to make sure Zara was all right before I left." He knelt down, his trembling hands taking both of Zara's steady ones. "You're going to hear a lot about this in the coming days. People are going to want interviews, want to make you a symbol, want to use your story. Some of that attention will be good, some will be hard. But I want you to remember something. What happened today wasn't about you. It was about her. About her hate, her fear, her brokenness. You were just brave enough to stand up and say it was wrong. Never doubt that you did the right thing." "Thank you, Professor," Zara said and hugged him tightly. The video footage hit social media within hours. Multiple passengers had uploaded their recordings and they spread like wildfire. 11-year-old calls police from plane after racist flight attendants attack. Read the headlines. The footage was damning, undeniable, impossible to dismiss or explain away. The airline CEO issued a statement within 12 hours. "We do not tolerate discrimination in any form. Diane Hartley has been immediately terminated and will face criminal charges. We are conducting a full investigation into how this was allowed to occur and implementing new policies to ensure it never happens again." Tom Whitmore, Diane's boyfriend and the regional manager who'd been covering up her complaints for years, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. When that investigation revealed dozens of buried complaints, evidence of systemic protection of discriminatory behavior, he was terminated as well. Kelly Martinez was promoted to lead the airline's new bias training program, a role she took seriously, determined to make sure no other child ever experienced what Zara had. Captain Alvarez was commended for his proper handling of the situation, and Patricia Dominguez received a formal recognition for speaking up. Zara and her mother were offered a substantial financial settlement, but Simone donated most of it to civil rights organizations, keeping only enough to cover Zara's counseling. Because despite her bravery, despite doing everything right, Zara struggled in the weeks that followed. She had nightmares about being trapped on the plane. She became anxious around authority figures. She questioned whether she'd done the right thing, whether she should have just stayed quiet, whether she'd caused too much trouble. But slowly, with therapy and her mother's support and letters from Professor Washington, she began to heal. And she began to understand the full scope of what she'd done. Because Diane wasn't just charged with assault and civil rights violations. The investigation into her background revealed a pattern of behavior spanning years. Other passengers came forward, people who'd experienced her discrimination but hadn't known how to report it or had been too afraid. A Muslim family she'd harassed on a flight 2 years ago. A Latino businessman she'd racially profiled. An elderly Asian woman she'd publicly humiliated. Each story added weight to the case, transformed it from an isolated incident into a systemic problem. And Zara's careful documentation, her journal entries with timestamps and exact quotes, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. At Diane's sentencing hearing 6 months later, Zara and Professor Washington were both present in the courtroom. Diane's lawyer tried one final time to minimize what had happened, claiming stress, claiming misunderstandings, claiming that Diane had suffered enough through the loss of her job and public humiliation. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Coleman who'd spent 30 years on the bench and had seen every excuse imaginable, was having none of it. Ms. Hartley, in my 3 decades as a judge, I have heard people blame poverty, addiction, mental illness, trauma, and a dozen other factors for their criminal behavior. Some of those explanations have merit. Yours does not. You blame stress, but millions of people experience stress without terrorizing children. You blame misunderstanding, but we have video evidence, audio recordings, witness testimony, and physical evidence that tells us exactly what you understood. You understood that you held power over people trapped on an aircraft with no ability to escape. You understood that a child couldn't fight back. You understood that your boyfriend's position would protect you from consequences. What you failed to understand, Ms. Hartley, is that actions have consequences, and your actions revealed exactly who you are. Judge Coleman sentenced Diane to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and 500 hours of community service to be performed at the National Civil Rights Museum. Perhaps, the judge said, spending time learning the history you've chosen to ignore will give you some perspective on the harm you've caused. Zara watched the sentencing with mixed feelings. Part of her felt vindicated, felt like justice had been served. But another part just felt sad. Sad that someone could carry so much hate. Sad that it had to come to this. Sad that she'd been forced to grow up a little faster, to lose some of her innocence, to learn lessons she shouldn't have had to learn at 11. Professor Washington's granddaughter Keisha did graduate from her program, and Professor Washington invited Zara and Simone to attend. They went, and Keisha played a violin solo dedicated to "The Bravest Girl I've Never Met." Afterward, Keisha and Zara talked for hours about music, about courage, about using art to change the world. "My grandfather told me what you did," Keisha said. "What you both did on that plane. I want you to know that every time I perform, every time I teach music to kids who look like us, I'm going to think about your courage. Because you reminded everyone that our voices matter." 6 months after the incident, Zara returned to the Midwest Youth Orchestra Summer Intensive, the opportunity she'd almost missed. This time, Simone took vacation time and drove her, both of them needing the time together, needing the road trip to heal some of what had been broken. At the program, Zara thrived. Her experience had changed her, matured her, given her a depth of understanding that translated into her music. When she played, her violin sang with emotion that made audiences weep. The program director pulled Simone aside at the final concert. "Your daughter has something special. Not just talent, though she has that in abundance. She has something deeper. An understanding of pain and resilience that most musicians spend lifetimes trying to access. Whatever she's been through, it's made her remarkable." The story didn't end with Diane's sentencing or Zara's musical success. It rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. The FAA launched a comprehensive review of discrimination policies in air travel. Airlines were required to implement passenger advocate positions on every flight, neutral parties trained to intervene when complaints arose. Complaints were required to be logged in a national database, making it impossible for regional managers to bury them. Flight attendants received mandatory bias training twice a year, and passengers were educated about their rights. Zara's journal, the careful documentation of a child who'd learned from her mother that evidence matters, was cited in 3 congressional hearings on discrimination in commercial travel. Zara testified via video for one of them, her face on a giant screen as she explained to lawmakers why documentation and official recording mattered. "I called 911 because I needed it on record," she told the committee, her voice steady despite the weight of dozens of congressional eyes on her. "I knew that without an official record what happened might disappear. Might get covered up. Might be turned into he said, she said. But a 911 call with a timestamp and recordings? That can't disappear. That's why I called. Because the truth needed to be protected." Her testimony went viral, was shown in classrooms across the country as an example of civic courage. Teachers used it to teach about documentation, about standing up for rights, about the importance of speaking truth to power. 1 year after the incident, on a warm June day almost exactly like the one when everything happened, Zara flew again. Different airline, different route, but the same anxiety churning in her stomach. Simone walked her to security, neither of them acknowledging how much harder this was than it should have been. "You don't have to do this, baby," Simone said quietly. "We can drive. We can take a train. You don't have to prove anything." "Yes, I do," Zara said, and she meant it. "I have to prove that she didn't win. That she didn't make me afraid of the world. That I'm still brave enough to fly." The flight was unremarkable in the best possible way. The flight attendants were kind and professional, treating everyone with equal respect. The pilot made sure all passengers were comfortable. When Zara asked to use the first-class bathroom because the coach ones were occupied, the flight attendant smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart. That's what it's there for." Zara sat in her window seat and pulled out a new journal, the old one having been submitted as evidence in Diane's trial. She opened to the first page and wrote, "June 16th, 1 year later. I'm flying again. Different plane, different destination, but the same me. A lot has happened this year. I testified before Congress. I won awards I never expected. I played violin in front of thousands of people. I've been called a hero more times than I can count. But here's what I've learned. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who did what my mom taught me to do. I spoke up when something was wrong. I documented what I saw. I asked for help when I needed it. And it turned out that was enough. Professor Washington writes to me every week. He says I've restored his faith in the next generation. That makes me want to cry and smile at the same time. Mr. Turner, the lawyer from the plane, has handled 3 more cases using what happened to me as precedent. He says we changed the law. I'm not sure I understand exactly how, but I'm proud of it. Mom says I had to grow up too fast. Maybe she's right. But I think about all the other kids who might have flown with Diane if I hadn't spoken up. All the people who might have been hurt if Tom Whitmore had kept covering up complaints. All the discrimination that might have continued if someone hadn't finally made enough noise that it couldn't be ignored. And I think about something Professor Washington told me. He said that change doesn't usually come from big, dramatic moments. It comes from ordinary people refusing to accept injustice. From small acts of courage that ripple outward in ways we can't predict. I was just a kid on a plane who called 911. But maybe that's all it takes sometimes. Maybe that's enough. The plane landed smoothly. Zara gathered her things, thanked the flight attendants sincerely, and walked off the aircraft into the terminal where new adventures waited. 3 years later, Zara was 14 and preparing for high school. She'd been offered a full scholarship to a prestigious performing arts academy. She still played violin, but she'd also discovered a new passion, law. She joined her school's mock trial team and discovered she had a gift for advocacy, for taking complex situations and distilling them down to their essential truth. Professor Washington, now 79 and moving slower but no less sharp, attended one of her mock trial competitions. Afterward he pulled her aside. "You're going to be a remarkable lawyer someday, Zara. You have what so many lawyers lack, the ability to see the humanity in every situation. To understand that law isn't just about rules and precedents. It's about people. About protecting those who can't protect themselves. You taught me that," Zara said. "On that plane. The way you stood up even though it was scary, even though it could have made things worse for you. You showed me what courage really looks like." "No, sweetheart. You showed me. I've spent my whole life teaching about the civil rights movement, about the people who stood up when it mattered. But you lived it. You are the living continuation of that movement. And you're just getting started." 5 years after the incident, new airline discrimination complaints had dropped by 63%. Not because discrimination had disappeared, but because the systems were better, because complainants knew their voices would be heard, because employees knew there would be consequences. Diane served her full sentence and was released on parole. She never spoke publicly about what happened, never gave interviews, never tried to tell her side of the story. She took a job in retail, far from the airline industry, living quietly in a small town, the weight of her actions a burden she'd carry for the rest of her life. But the people she'd hurt, they went on to do remarkable things. Professor Washington lived to see his 91st birthday, surrounded by 3 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren, and one extraordinary young woman named Zara who'd become like family. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, and at his funeral, Zara played Mahler's Adagietto on her violin. The piece he'd told her was his favorite. Kelly Martinez, the young flight attendant who'd found her courage, became the airline's chief diversity officer, implementing policies that transformed company culture and made air travel genuinely safer and more equitable for everyone. Daniel Turner, the civil rights lawyer, won landmark cases using Zara's story as precedent, establishing new protections for passengers and clearer consequences for discrimination. And Zara? She graduated high school with honors, got into Harvard Law School on a full scholarship, and clerked for a federal judge, the same Judge Patricia Coleman who'd sentenced Diane. She specialized in civil rights law, taking cases for people who'd experienced discrimination, who'd been told their voices didn't matter, who needed someone to believe them. In her final year of law school, Zara was invited to speak at the National Civil Rights Museum, the same place where Diane had been required to do her community service years earlier. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and thought about that scared 11-year-old on a plane with a journal and a decision to make. "People ask me all the time what made me call 911 that day," she began, her voice steady and strong. "They want to know if I was terrified, if I knew what would happen, if I understood the significance of what I was doing. And the truth is, I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea what would happen. And I definitely didn't understand the full significance. I was just a kid who'd been taught by her mother that documentation matters. That evidence protects truth. That when something is wrong, you speak up even when your voice shakes. Especially when your voice shakes. What I've learned in the years since is that change doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require fearlessness. It doesn't require you to be extraordinary. It requires you to be present, to pay attention, to document what you see, and to speak up when it matters." That day on the plane, I wasn't trying to change policy or start a movement or become a symbol. I was just trying to get someone to listen. To believe that what was happening was real and wrong and needed to stop. But here's what I've realized. That's how all movements start. With ordinary people doing ordinary things, paying attention, documenting, speaking up, and refusing to accept that injustice is inevitable. My mother gave me a bracelet the morning I flew alone for the first time. She said it would keep me safe. And in a way it did. Not because it had magical powers, but because it reminded me that I came from people who'd fought for their dignity, who'd refused to be diminished, who'd taught me that my voice mattered. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your voice matters. Your observations matter. Your courage, even when it's small and shaking, matters. Document what you see. Speak up when something's wrong. Ask for help when you need it. And trust that those seemingly small acts might ripple outward in ways you can't imagine. I was 11 years old with a journal and a phone, and I changed airline policy. Imagine what you could do. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. But what Zara remembered most wasn't the applause. It was the young black girl, maybe 10 or 11, who approached her afterward with a purple notebook covered in pins. "I want to be like you," the girl said shyly. "My mom gave me this journal and told me to write down when things don't seem fair. So I've been practicing. Documenting. Just in case." Zara knelt down, seeing herself in this child's eyes, and felt the weight of generations of resistance, resilience, and courage passing from one person to the next. "Then you're already doing it," Zara said. "You're already brave. Keep documenting. Keep speaking up. Keep believing that your voice matters. Because it does." That night, Zara called her mother, the way she did every night no matter how busy she was. "Hey Mom. Just wanted to tell you I love you. I love you too, baby. How was the speech?" "It was good. There was this little girl afterward with a journal just like mine. Made me think about everything that's happened since that flight. All because you taught me to document and speak up." Simone was quiet for a moment, and Zara could hear the emotion in her voice when she finally spoke. "You know what I think about sometimes? What if I hadn't given you that bracelet? What if I hadn't told you to speak up if something felt wrong? What if you'd stayed quiet? But I didn't stay quiet, Mom. Because you raised me not to. I'm so proud of you, Zara. Every single day, I'm so proud of who you've become. I learned from the best." After they hung up, Zara sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She was working on her senior thesis, a comprehensive analysis of institutional accountability in discrimination cases. But first she pulled up her email and began typing. Dear Professor Washington's granddaughter Keisha, I've been thinking about your grandfather a lot lately. About the day he stood up for me on that plane. About all the conversations we had over the years. About how he always said we were part of a continuum, carrying forward the work of those who came before us. I spoke at the Civil Rights Museum today and I talked about that flight. About what he taught me about courage. About how he showed me that being brave doesn't mean being unafraid. It means acting despite the fear. There was a little girl there today with a journal and I saw myself in her. And I saw your grandfather in me. And I realized that this is how change actually happens. Not through one dramatic moment, but through this chain of ordinary people teaching each other to be brave, to speak up, to refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Your grandfather used to say he taught history, but what he really taught was hope. Hope that things could be better. Hope that our actions mattered. Hope that the arc of the moral universe, though long, bends toward justice. I carry that hope with me every day. And I wanted you to know that his legacy lives on, not just in his books or his teachings, but in every person he inspired to stand a little taller, speak a little louder, and believe a little more fiercely in the possibility of change. Thank you for sharing him with me. Thank you for the beautiful gift of his friendship. With love and gratitude, Zara. She hit send and closed her laptop, then walked to her window and looked out at the city lights stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there were other planes taking flight, carrying other passengers, other children traveling alone for the first time. And because of what happened 5 years ago on Flight 772, they were a little bit safer. The systems were a little bit better. The protections were a little bit stronger. One phone call from a scared 11-year-old with a journal and her mother's courage had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives, changing policies, creating precedents, and reminding everyone that justice doesn't happen automatically. It happens because ordinary people refuse to accept that it won't. Zara touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one her mother had given her that morning 5 years ago. She still wore it every single day, a reminder of where she came from and what she'd learned. That courage isn't the absence of fear, that documentation protects truth, that speaking up matters, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay silent when the world tells you to accept injustice. She was just a girl who'd called 911 from a plane. But sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. If Zara's story moved you, if it made you think about your own courage, your own voice, your own responsibility to speak up when something's wrong, then share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Because these stories matter. These voices matter. Your voice matters. And somewhere out there, right now, there's another child with a journal and a phone and a decision to make about whether to speak up or stay silent. Let's make sure they know that speaking up is always worth it. Because that's how justice happens. Not all at once, but one brave voice at a time.